What's up, guys? So today I'm going to be doing Bleach 571 chapter discussion review, and I'm going to be doing a page-by-page, play-by-play. Not so much because it was that great a chapter, but because I had read it earlier and I kind of forgotten what it was about, and I couldn't immediately film because of time issues. So, not saying this wasn't a bad chapter. I mean, not saying it was a bad chapter, but it wasn't anything splendid. But let's just get started. First off, Vice Captain Kusajishi, I think she's actually pretty darn beast in certain ways. Honestly, like, this is what made the chapter. This was actually, in certain areas, a great chapter. I mean, certain pages were awesome. Like, that ending with Kusajishi and her sword, her her Zanpakuto sword, ridiculous. I think that was perfect. Titakubo, him choosing that sort of a Zanpakuto for this girl was just splendid. And we've definitely seen an evolution of this character. Honestly, she's always been this sort of tiny little pet that Kenpachi always brings about, and she was always drawn differently too. She was like this little tiny pet. She had like she was drawn in a very frail way, but in this chapter she was definitely depicted as her own self. Her hairstyle is different, the way she carries herself and talks is different. She's not just this sort of pet that is some sort of sidekick that never talks anymore. She has her own personality, her own conscience. She thinks for herself now. And she pretty much tells the readers that she is her own person, not just some sidekick anymore. And so we got this creepy, this very sort of creepy Stern Ritter. And honestly, had he just stayed with the phase 2 of his disappearing act, he would be no different than just some sort of invisibility character. And these sort of characters in, say, Dragon Ball and other manga series were always depicted as very low class power level characters. Like, they just turn invisible, so what? That's not that strong an ability. And again, I'm assuming you guys have read the chapter, so I'm not going to explain what phase 2 means. But anyhow, you know, he does this thing, and here's another big fallacy for me. Like, I honestly think this character is really cool on how like freaky he is in certain ways with his eyes, like one eye just like always staring off in the wrong direction. But I think it's very stupid in the fact that he is explaining how all his abilities work. Granted, I think he's doing it because of his abilities and the fact that he can in fact just literally just blink out and make them forget on like what he just explained them. But still, I always felt that villains that explain, that take their time to explain all their abilities to the point where the enemy can sort of understand it completely and sort of formulate counterattacks and weaknesses. I think that's retardedly stupid and unrealistic. If I was a villain, I wouldn't bother to even explain it for a second what my abilities were. And on top of that, I do think that Kisajishi, this vice captain, I forgot her name already, Kusajishi, she's very awesome in many ways. And yes, I do have the manga on the side to my left, just so I'm scrolling through it very quickly, chronologically, to review it. I think she's quite the character in the fact that she's just she plays this naive act, and I've said this before in my last video on the last chapter, but she plays this naive act and boom, she's always like instinctive, like, oh, I think this guy's a bad guy, just because he makes my heart skip a beat, which I think is very funny. And so he's explaining these abilities, and I really do think phase 3 is what makes him special. If it wasn't for phase 3, he'd just be a standard invisibility act, which is kind of lame. And so phase 3, I'm going to explain it again because of its importance. It pretty much makes you forget everything about this guy. Not just it doesn't just wipe him from your existence physically, but through your mind as well. Now, I'm kind of curious. I think how it works is that you have to be in phase 3, and so when you're in phase 3, you're also in phase 2 and phase 1. You're invisible to the touch and so forth. But on top of that, if you step out of phase 3, everything gets returned again. So if he steps out of phase 3, your memories of the guy returns and so forth. And so I think he has to stay in phase 3 for the longest time. And in fact, it's actually pretty interesting because I'm going to actually read this out to you. Switching back from phase 1 to phase 2 is something I can accomplish in a blink of an eye. My essence will simply vanish, and then the physical form has a sort of a lagging trend, but all that means is that you're punching at a ghost of your former self. So I'm actually going to reiterate this because of its importance. Phase 1 makes him vanish. Phase 2 makes his essence vanish. While in phase 2, which I used just now, my form always lags behind. So what's the difference between phase 1 and phase 2? Phase 1, okay, so technically phase 1 is the sort of like, I guess you are invisible, and not more so than that, your physical form is gone as well. So it's more than invisibility. It's like you are wiped from the physical plane. However, the essence part, it didn't really make sense. I guess your essence is just like your actual aura will disappear as well. And then phase 3, I guess it's just psychological. So there's 3 aspects to him. I do think it's very interesting, but at the same time, his weakness is very clear. He seems like a standard average Joe without these 3 phases. Like, his punches aren't that strong. He really has no real power, and so what it seems like is he's using these as a crutch. So personally, I think this battle, I would prefer to just end quickly. That is until I saw the last page where she reveals her Zanpakuto. And I actually do have to take that back slightly because I did very much enjoy this girl and how she puts in a little bit of comic relief where she's like, there's this build up of where the Stern Ritter's like, why? How does he know that I'm a bad guy? It makes no logical sense that she would just attack me when her memory is wiped of me immediately. Why? She doesn't know if I'm friend or foe immediately. And then she's like, she talks about how her heart skips a beat and how back when Kenpachi was here, Kenpachi, obviously Zaraki Kenpachi, he's legitimately a monster, a combat genius. And so any sort of like inclination that rubs off of him to her, she probably takes as fact, because if he uses those instincts well, and he always wins based off those instincts, then you probably want to use them too. So Kenpachi did the same thing where if he does that, if his heart skips a beat, then that guy's a bad guy and he wants to slice him up into a million pieces. And so there's a little bit of comic relief where this Stern Ritter's like, what the heck's going on? This idiot, this girl's an idiot. The other companion of this girl is much more smarter. She knows not to attack anyone unless it's first established if it's friend or foe. And then he's like, I'm gonna kill this girl, takes out some sort of knife and tries to stab her, and boom, she gets it turns out this girl is faster than this guy, and he gets slashed here. And then here's another thing about Bleach that I don't understand. Like, every time something happens, the guy stops for a moment and literally explains everything about their ability. And so this vice captain does it too, which I think is really stupid. Realistically, it doesn't make sense, but from the reader's perspective, the manga perspective, it does. Otherwise, we will never really understand what's the full extent of their abilities. So from a tactical perspective, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why would you reveal everything about your Zanpakuto? But she does, and I really do think that this really wraps up the chapter nicely, because it makes her awesome, and it really makes me want to stay and see this fight out. And for a moment, I'm not so impatient as to see what's happening with Kenpachi and Ichigo. So her sword's actually very cool. It's a copycat blade, and it just keeps swiping, I believe, everything in front of and behind the blade, and every move is being traced and copied. Now, what does that actually mean? Is it replicated to an extent where it fills up the whole room? I don't think so, because that would mean that everything in the room gets sliced up. I think it's more of like a straight line. Everything in front of and behind the blade gets sliced up. So I guess she has to be very careful with where she slices, I guess. So basically, she says how the entire space of her field of vision, even if she misses, someone will hit as long as it's in her field of vision. So I don't really understand how that realistically works, because I mean, what if your friends or your allies are in your field of vision too? Do you just skip those areas as well? Anyhow, her Zanpakuto is revealed, and it sort of comes out and is shown, and it's ridiculous. Like, first off, she's this little tiny creature, and her hairstyle is changing and everything, and she's more of her own individual. But behind her is this huge thing called Senpo Kenjun. This is just her, I think it's called Reiyashi. No, her Kishi or something. I forgot what it's called. But it isn't her Bankai yet, and it's fairly monstrous. Not that huge, but it's kind of strange. It's like this, like the face has this like weird pole sticking out from above and below, and then like on the side it's this like furry creature that may be part of its arm, but also has eyes as well. And then you got this strange sort of pole arm that seems to be made out of bone. That's part of this creature, and then there's like arms, like skeletons attaching it. And behind this whole thing is this huge black cloak area, and then below the pole arm is this like black and white sort of axe. So it looks really cool, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And therein lies the chapter. And so he's like, "You've got to be kidding me!" And then she's like, she has this like childlike face, and she does a slash, and then you see this huge monstrous creature behind him do the slash with her. And so that ends the chapter. I really think it's quite an amazing ending to the chapter. We'll see what happens in the next chapter. Let me know in your comments on your predictions and your opinions. I'll see you later. As always, like, favorite, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. As always, remember, subscribing is completely free. So hit the like button, share the video with your friends, and subscribe. I'll see you in my next video. Peace.